everyone. Welcome. I hope everyone enjoyed the breakfast. We're so thrilled to have so many people here in person and joining us virtually. Apologies for the few minutes of being late. But I wanted to just do a little bit of housekeeping. As I said, we're thrilled to have so many of you here, and we have people watching our webcast from all over the world, including the UK, the US, Mexico, Austria, Italy, New Zealand, and Australia. So to those people, buenos dias, buenas tardes, bon pomeriggio, bonjour, and welcome to everyone. We have a really full day today with amazing speakers and panelists.
Hello, здравствуйте, bonjour, bienvenue. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are so thrilled to have you all here. You know, this started out as a small dream and now it has flourished into this wonderful community of healthcare professionals, patients, survivors, and caregivers, and we're so grateful to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Of course, none of this could happen without our incredible sponsors. So we would like to thank Lilly, who is the title sponsor once again, Taiho Pharma Canada Inc., who is our silver sponsor. Our hosting sponsor is St. Michael's Hospital here at Li Ka-shing, and GSM, who is the bronze sponsor. And this year, for the first time, we also have product sponsors, which are some of the goodies you have in the lunch bags, and that is Nestle Health Science, David's Tea, and Love the Good Fats. Of course, I'm Teresa. We should have said that. We don't need to introduce ourselves in terms of what we've been through. You can read about that in the program booklet.
And I'm Katie, hi.
So, as I said, we have a lot of amazing speakers, and we have a few special things that are happening. The first one is we're going to start off with a video, and we'll give a little bit of an explanation of that afterwards.
I live without a stomach.
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 So what we're doing with that is our campaign, and that is celebrating patients and survivors, and also honoring all of those that have gone through this very difficult disease. So what we're hoping is those of you that feel comfortable, and those of you that are living without a stomach, there's an area just behind where all the food is. Someone will be videotaping you very naturally, and if you could wear the I live without a stomach button and just say the words, and then we are going to do a campaign and hopefully go viral across the world. So you can do that throughout the day.
Because we're proud to live without a stomach.
So, as you know, we are My Gut Feeling. We're the first stomach cancer foundation in Canada, founded by survivors for patients, survivors, and caregivers. Our 4 pillars of our mission are support, education, awareness, and advocacy. Sorry, I have to get used to this. Support is the heart of our foundation. And in the past year, we have, I guess, in a good way, had incredible growth, although we're not happy that more people are being diagnosed, but we are thrilled that people can find us and have a place to find support and feel a community. So the growth of our regular monthly support groups has increased dramatically, both in person and virtually. patients and survivors and caregivers have been reaching out to us from all over the world. Honestly, it's been incredible. We have people reaching out to us all the time, every day. And just this past week alone, 15 people reached out, either that have been just newly diagnosed or caregivers. So it's from something that we were getting one call every 2 weeks, we are now getting almost daily calls.
The one great thing that I think we've been able to achieve is to bring My Gut Feeling not just to Canada, but to the world. So we were very fortunate to actually attend the International Gastric Cancer Congress in Prague. And this actually hosted 1,600 healthcare professionals that were interested in stomach cancer. And we were the first patient group to present a workshop to these healthcare professionals and bring the patient voice to the forefront. We presented on surviving gastric cancer, bridging science, and the patient perspective. Some of the topics that we presented on were how to find the best physician, the challenges of diet and nutrition, integrating healthcare resources, awareness, and the unique patient needs. And then we presented on the ever-changing journey of gastric cancer patients. And what we did, we asked your input. We asked the patients, the survivors, and the caregivers, what do you want your healthcare professionals to know about the gastric cancer journey? And we were able to directly quote some of the patient voices and bring their voice to the forefront of this gastric cancer conference. So really, thank you. We could not have done that without you. The other thing that we've been doing is we've been starting to get into research. So we actually submitted to PCODER as a patient advocacy group to give feedback on what are the needs of the patients and how we can do better research to help patients with gastric cancer.
One of the things that we're incredibly proud of is the establishment of our medical advisory board, who basically have been our support pretty much since we started the foundation, but we have now formalized it. So some of them are here, the others may be here, the others will be here later on, and I would just like them to stand if they're here, because they absolutely deserve a round of applause. These are the people that, so it is.
Come on, be proud, yeah. Thank you, thank you.
So by name, it's Melissa Aronson, Dr. Savtaj Brar, Dr. Christine Bresden-Masley, Dr. Natalie Coburn, Denise Gabrielson, Dr. Terrence Lee, Dr. Howard Lim, and Dr. Stephanie Snow. And honestly, we could not do the work we do without their support and their advice and their guidance. And last but not least, awareness and stomach cancer in the media. So one of the things we really wanted to do this year was really bring awareness to the people outside of our patient community. So we moved forward with a good-sized media campaign which worked incredibly well for us. We were in print across Canada, and online we actually had 15 million audience impression marks. So it's pretty incredible, and it really... We also did a campaign through the Toronto Transit Commission, so some people may have seen our posters at some of the stations. We actually had people reach out because they did see them, so that was fantastic. And we've done a couple of radio and podcast interviews. We did one on Global News Radio with Ted Michaels that aired on November 10th, but we will have it up. It was on our social media, but we will have it up on our site shortly. and it will be up there. And actually today, believe it or not, The Tonic with Jamie Boosin from Zoomer Radio will be podcasting an interview at 11 a.m. So if any of you want to step out for half an hour.
If we're boring you.
Yeah, if you're bored, they're actually going to be airing it today at 11 or tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. So stomach cancer is finally being listened about and heard, and hopefully more understanding about it. So we will move right into our speakers. So our first speaker, who is our keynote speaker, is a pretty amazing person. We met Terrence, I would say, just before he was about to have surgery. He was only 30, and we found out that he was a doctor. And so we were all, Katie and I were just kind of in shock that a doctor was coming to us to find support. He's been through an incredible journey. We'll have him tell you his story. So I want to welcome Terrence Lee as our keynote speaker.
Hello, everyone. Wow, what a crowd. Well, I just want to start by thanking Teresa and Katie for putting all of this together. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. This is exponential growth compared to last year and the year before when it all started. So this is really impressive. So I'm Terrence. I want to start by sharing my story and then going through some of the lessons and insight that I've learned throughout this journey. So all of this started with me in the spring of 2018. And it's starting with burping. So that was my first symptom that I've noticed, is that I was just belching excessively. There was a lot of gas in my stomach. I was burping several times a day. And then progressively, over the course of several months, I started burping several times an hour. And, you know, so I'm a physician. I have a lot of physician colleagues. I've asked everyone that I knew, what was happening? What do you think was happening? And the most common response that I had was that you're probably stressed out. This is probably nothing. You're 30. How could this be anything significant? Maybe you just have some reflux and this might go away. And then several months down the road, I started having a bit of acid reflux, sort of heartburn type of symptom. Again, I didn't make a big deal of it because I didn't think it was anything dangerous. And several weeks later, I eventually got to the point where I was burping so much that before eating a meal, I had to sort of clear out and empty out my stomach by burping before I could have food in. But this really came much later, several months after the start of my symptoms. I never really had swallowing difficulty otherwise. I could still eat and drink normally, aside from this burping issue, which I could clear. I could burp out whatever I had in my stomach, and then I could eat. I never had any weight loss. I never had early satiety. All of the classic symptoms that you would read in a textbook about stomach cancer, I had none of them. And in fact, at some point, I was working with a gastroenterologist, and I told her, what do you think this is? And she said, you know what, this is probably nothing. Why don't you try taking a PPI? And if in a few weeks it doesn't make you feel better, I'm going to scope you just to make sure that's nothing serious. So I took the PPI. My symptoms didn't go away. The heartburn symptoms I had didn't go away. Eventually I went for a scope, and it was a bit of a shock because so my scope was supposed to take 5 minutes. It's supposed to be an in and out procedure. We go in, have a look around, and come out. But they ended up taking 20 minutes because they found a big mass at the gastroesophageal junction, the GE junction, and it didn't look good. So eventually I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. I had CT scan that showed that I had at least stage 3. and I met my surgeon, a thoracic surgeon. So I walked into his office, and he explained to me what the plan was. So the plan was, we're gonna go for chemotherapy, you're gonna go for this massive surgery, and then for more chemotherapy. And then he went to the details as to what the surgery was going to be. So he said, we are going to cut out your esophagus, we're gonna cut out part of your stomach so that we can capture that GE junction, and this is gonna change your life. You're really gonna lose a lot of weight from that. So to prepare for that, you should start gaining weight. You should gain as much weight as you possibly can. And how I appear today is not much different from what I was last year before my surgery. I weighed about 143 pounds. This is how much I weighed for my entire life. And so the way he was explaining this to me was that this is going to be an extreme form of bariatric surgery, and we're gonna submit this to someone who is skinny to begin with. And so this was going to be challenging. So I set out to prepare for the surgery. Over the course of about 2 months, I gained 15 pounds, and this was a record for me. I was eating everything under the sun. I didn't care if things were extremely unhealthy and fatty. I just wanted calories, right? Like anything that's fatty, calories. I stopped eating vegetables because there's 0 calories in those. So like breakfast, lunch, dinner, I was eating like 3,000 calories a day, which is double what I normally ate. And so it was a huge amount, and I went to the gym to build muscle. And so I ended up gaining 15 pounds, which was a record. And this was great. I could eat everything that I could, and I didn't have to suffer the consequences. During that time span, I went for chemotherapy. It was 4 cycles of 2 week long. So each cycle was 2 week long. It was flock chemotherapy. It wasn't that bad at first. I mean, you have the nausea, you have some diarrhea, maybe some vomiting, but it really wasn't that bad for me. Before surgery, it wasn't that bad. So I went for surgery eventually. And so the surgery was supposed to be a 6-hour operation. It was supposed to be done laparoscopically, meaning just a few holes in my abdomen, a few holes in my chest. We're gonna put some cameras in, and we're gonna do this as minimally invasive as possible. So when the surgeon went in and had a look, my tumor looked a lot bigger than what he expected. He told me afterwards that it was the size of his fist. So he had to convert from a minimally invasive approach to essentially opening up my abdomen, opening up my chest, and just trying to take out this huge mass in one go. The surgery lasted, instead of 6 hours, it ended up lasting 11 hours. Initially, he told me that I didn't need a feeding tube because we're only gonna take out part of the stomach. But as the surgery progressed, he had to take out my entire stomach and a good chunk of my esophagus. So I ended up having no stomach whatsoever. And he had to put a feeding tube in. And then he did this lymph node dissection. And the gold standard in the literature is taking out 15 lymph nodes. He took out 48 lymph nodes. So he spent forever just trying to scrape as many lymph nodes as he could because his tumor was so big. And that's how I ended up after surgery. Within a day or two of surgery, they found out that I was bleeding. I required several units of blood. And so I went back to the OR, and where they looked around to see where the bleeding was coming from. They ended up spending 6 hours in the OR just looking around and making sure everything was nice and tidy, and the bleeding stopped on its own eventually. So that was a big operation. I ended up staying in hospital for 2.5 weeks. When I went home, I had to rely on a feeding tube. So it was a feeding tube in my abdomen. It's called a J-tube. I was getting supplemental nutrition through this tube every night for the next 5 months because there was no way that I could eat enough nutrients by mouth without a stomach, because after that kind of operation, I could eat maybe a quarter of what I used to eat over a very long period of time. And so you hear people losing 30, 40, 50, even 100 pounds after this type of surgery. 100 pounds, I started off at 145 40 something, 45, 250 pounds. So there was no way I could lose 100 pounds. But luckily, thanks to the feeding tube, I only ended up losing about 20 pounds, and I gained 10 of those pounds back. So that feeding tube essentially saved my life in a way, even though at the time I really hated it. And so after surgery, we went for more chemotherapy. Now, chemo this time around was a lot more challenging. So imagine going for regular chemo, you get your nausea, you get your diarrhea, but the challenge is that your GI system is completely upside down. What you thought you could eat before, you can't eat anymore. Leafy greens are really challenging. Anything too fibrous just goes right through. You get diarrhea for no reason. And on top of it all, I found out that I didn't feel hunger anymore. So the hormone that makes you feel hunger, ghrelin, 90% of it is produced in the stomach, 90% of it. So you take away your stomach, you stop feeling hunger. And so I essentially had to rely on some other means to tell me that I needed food. So I would feel lightheaded, I would feel a little shaky, a little hypoglycemic, and so that's how I knew that I'm hungry. And those are signs that I now feel to know when to eat, because I don't feel hunger anymore. So I went for chemotherapy. It was tough, but I went through it. In January of this year, chemotherapy was over. In February of this year, we finally took up the feeding tube because I was slowly getting used to eating more and more, and I didn't eat anymore. A few months go by, and I started having, I was feeling good, but I started having different symptoms. I was starting to feel some back pain, which I didn't really know what to make of it. And eventually, through a routine scheduled CT scan, they found out that I had a recurrence. So I had lymph nodes that were bigger in my lower back, in the mediastinal region, in my pancreas, in my spleen. And so that was quite shocking. That was in May of this year. And so I met with my surgeon. We discussed the treatment options at the time. And so we talked about surgery. Surgery was out of the question. There's nothing to cut out because it's sort of everywhere. What about radiation? Well, radiation doesn't really work because radiation works best if it's a narrow focused region, and in my case, it was essentially metastatic. What about chemotherapy? Well, chemotherapy didn't work that well because the tumor sort of came back, and if we are going to try chemotherapy, we'll have to try a different class. And then I remember that through the molecular testing of my tumor, I was part of this group called MSI high, microsatellite instability high. And this is the type of tumor that does better with immunotherapy than chemotherapy. But the challenge is that at the time when I knew about my recurrence, in Canada, immunotherapy wasn't yet approved for stomach cancer outside of a clinical trial. In the US, the FDA approved pembrolizumab in September of 2017, and yet in Canada, we still don't have anything approved outside of a clinical trial. So that was a problem. And on the day that I had my recurrence, there was nothing in Toronto that I was eligible for in terms of clinical trial. Nothing was open yet. So I ended up seeking a second opinion. I actually went to Vancouver, believe it or not. And there, they had a clinical trial for me with immunotherapy. That trial was open in Vancouver, London, and Hamilton. So I had different cities I could go to get that treatment. But luckily, about 2 weeks later, I found out that in Toronto, a trial had just opened where I could enroll. And I ended up getting my treatment at Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto. So that treatment was a combination of pembrolizumab and another experimental drug by Merck. If you're interested, that experimental drug is an ILT4 inhibitor. It has never been tested in humans. I've been told that in mice, it wasn't that bad. The side effects are not that bad. But it has never been tested in humans. And so when this happened, they called this a phase 1 trial, where the purpose of the trial is to see how much of the drug can we give you until you start getting side effects from it, and we have to stop the dosage. And so I'm part of this trial now. So it's a combination of pembrolizumab and this experimental drug. Luckily, this trial was open in Toronto. It was also open in Ottawa, 2 American cities, and 2 cities in Israel. And so I was quite lucky that I lived in Toronto and this trial was open for me. But if I had lived in a smaller city or a part of Canada that didn't have available clinical trials, then I wouldn't have access to it. And so I've been on this trial for the last 6 months now. It's essentially 2 infusions back-to-back of these 2 drugs once every 3 weeks. In terms of side effects, I've actually had 0 side effect from it. And so I need to emphasize this once again. With chemotherapy, everyone gets nauseous, everyone gets diarrhea, everyone gets tired. Even something as simple as having good energy. You don't have energy with chemotherapy, and that affects everyone. With immunotherapy, I've had 0 side effect. I didn't have any of those side effects, and I've been on it for 6 months. And this is the type of drug that you can go on for years. If you don't have any of the serious side effects, you can be on this immunotherapy once every 3 weeks. It doesn't really affect your life. In fact, I've gone back to working part-time as a physician in a hospital downtown at St. Mike's. So I never imagined that I would be working and going through treatment at the same time. If this had been chemotherapy, I definitely would not have been able to work, because you get chemo, you're tired for a week or 2, you get nauseous, it just wouldn't happen. With immunotherapy, this is something that I can see just going forward, and I think this is really the future of where this drug is headed. The only problem is that as of today, it's still in Canada. You can only access it through a clinical trial because it's not yet approved by Health Canada for stomach cancer. And so this is where we're at in terms of my journey, my story. There's a few lessons that I've gained from it. And so I have a few messages. So my first message is to family doctors, nurse practitioners, and other frontline providers. Lower the threshold at which you send patients for upper endoscopies. And because if you rely on symptoms that are specific enough to warrant red flags being triggered for stomach cancer, it's already too late. The tumor would be big enough. If the tumor is big enough to cause symptoms, then it's already at stage 3 or stage 4. And that's not something so the chances of survival are quite low. So in my case, for example, I had burping for months before I went to get a scope. Perhaps if I had gone to a scope earlier, when my symptoms first came on, maybe my tumor would have been stage 2 instead of stage 3. And that's a big difference in mortality. It's a really big difference. And so my message for everyone, in the absence of a universal screening program, is to really lower the threshold at which to send patients for a scope. I think in an ideal world, like anyone who gets acid reflux should have a scope, or some sort of screening programs. Perhaps, if you have access to BERM studies, that could be something you can go for. But really, a scope is really the only way to diagnose stomach cancer. Maybe in the future we'll have a blood test or some sort of molecular markers we can send patients for. But in the meantime, just let your patients go for scopes. And if you're a patient or if you're a future patient, you worry about symptoms, just go for a scope. So that's really our most powerful tool in Canada today to reduce gastric cancer mortality. So that's my first message. My second message has to do with screening. So there are some countries in the world, namely South Korea and Japan, who do have universal screening starting at the age of 40 and 50 respectively. In South Korea, every man and woman starting at the age of 40 goes for a scope every 2 years. Right, so at the age of 40, every 2 years, so that's quite significant. Now, you could say that there's been studies looking at cost effectiveness in North America where the prevalence of stomach cancer is much lower. But I would advocate starting screening in high-risk populations, so patients who are from ethnicities of from geographic areas of high prevalence. So the East Asians, the South Americans, the Central Europeans, and the Eastern Europeans. Perhaps we can start screening with those population and then roll out to the rest of us. I think in an ideal world where money wasn't an issue, everyone starting the age of 20 should go for a scope every 2 years. And I think that's really, in an ideal world, that's what we should do, but we're not there yet. Perhaps one day we'll develop a blood test where everyone can get screened, but we're not there yet. So to be practical, we should start at least having a framework to screen patients who are at higher risk. Currently, we don't have any frameworks whatsoever in Canada. There's nothing. And so we rely on symptoms. And the symptoms are so non-specific that it's also not helpful. So really, we have nothing to help prevent this at this moment. So sending patients for scope at a lower threshold and starting a framework to decide what kind of screening program we need are steps to achieve that. My third and final message is about getting access to immunotherapy in Canada. So so I'm part of this MSI high group. The data is there, the science is there. PD-1 inhibitors such as pembrolizumab work better than chemotherapy for patients who are MSI high. Now, MSI high is a small subset of the stomach cancer group, but we know the data is there. So why is it that we still don't have access to it in Canada? I mean, the US have had access to pembrolizumab since September 2017. When I started my treatment 6 months ago, we didn't have access in Canada. 6 months later, we still don't have access in Canada. The only way we can get it in Canada is through a clinical trial. But the problem with clinical trials is that you have to be at the right place at the right time under the right circumstances to fit into the criteria of clinical trials. We're lucky that in Toronto where clinical trials open all the time, but then if you're in a smaller part, if you come from a smaller part in Canada, you might not have access to that kind of therapy. And it's not just a matter of improving mortality or effectiveness with immunotherapy versus chemotherapy for certain subsets. It's also a huge difference in quality of life. So for me, I've been on immunotherapy much longer than chemotherapy, and I've had zero side effect. And it's made such a difference in my life that I've been able to go back to work as a doctor. I've diagnosed patients with gastric cancer. I've looked after patients at the end stage of gastric cancers in hospitals. And so, and I'm doing all of this while being treated with immunotherapy, and I'm at stage 4 now. So it makes a big difference. And so my message is expedite the process for Health Canada to get these drugs approved. The science is there. We know they work best on certain subsets, and so we should just expedite the process. So those are my insights. These are my messages. It's been a long journey. It's been a year and a half of this, and I hope to continue fighting on for many more years. I just want to thank, first of all, Katie and Teresa for organizing this conference. I also want to thank my family, without whom I couldn't have been, I wouldn't be here today without them. And they've been such a huge support in my life that I'm forever grateful. So thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference. I think I'm supposed to take questions.
I have a question.
Yes, at the back.
Yeah, what is immunotherapy, and is it just one drug a day? Like, what does it do to your body?
Yes, so immunotherapy, in my specific case with the PD-1 inhibitors, it essentially boosts your immune system to attack the tumor cells. So the tumors are smart enough to evade your immune system by setting defenses, by setting different proteins, let's say, and they evade the immune system. That allows them to grow bigger and bigger. With that immunotherapy drug, we nullify those defenses so the immune system can come in and attack it. The drug I'm getting once every 3 weeks. It's a half-hour infusion. So I get those 2 drugs back to back, and I get that once every 3 weeks. Yes.
Doctor, may I ask you, did your surgeon tell you why you get stomach cancer? What's the cause?
That's $1 million question. Nobody really knows why you get stomach cancer. We know that there are perhaps some risk factors: alcohol, smoking, obesity, none of which I had. I was not obese, I never smoked, I rarely drink. It might be a combination of genetics and diet, but nobody really knows. Yeah. Yes.
I'm from the United States, and we have a roadblock called the FDA. What is stopping Canada from doing clinical trials here? Is it something in the government? Is it something that they don't? Do you have an FDA equivalent that's preventing it?
So we have Health Canada. So that I suppose that's the equivalent of the FDA. The differences between Canada and the US is that in our case, so Health Canada approves the drugs. The provinces then have to decide to fund them. So it's sort of a 2-step process, but we're not even at the first step yet, where Health Canada approving the drugs. So that's really the first step. And then funding can be decided in subsequent steps. In terms of clinical trials, so we have access to clinical trials. Those are funded by pharmaceutical companies. That's why I'm on this drug now, because I'm part of this clinical trial. But beyond the clinical trials, we don't really have access to the drug. Yes?
We have a question online. Someone is asking, how can a patient get help in finding a clinical trial? In my case, I got help through my oncologist, who got me connected to a different oncologist who ran clinical trials. So go through your oncologist, but there's another way of finding clinical trials if you're a little bit more, I guess, health savvy. There's clinicaltrials.gov, I think. It's an international sort of collaboration where they list all clinical trials running around in the world for actually every single clinical trial for all kinds of disease. So what you do, you go on this website, you type in, let's say, gastric cancer, let's say stage 3 or whatnot, and so it's going to list clinical trials run by different cities around the world, and that's how I find clinical trials. So you can filter by city. So you can say, Toronto or Vancouver, and see what kind of clinical trials there are in those cities. You'll find that, for example, if you type in gastric cancer, in China, they have like 5 or 6 studies with pembrolizumab, and we don't have that in Canada. And there are some clinical trials in the US, in Europe. And so clinical trials are very city dependent, and there are many of them. So clinicaltrial.gov is one way to approach them.
Everyone, the people online, they can't hear the questions, so if you could just wait for the microphone, or if the speaker can just summarize the question. Thank you so much.
I think question over there in red.
Hi, thank you for being here, and thank you that I can be here. My daughter was also a doctor, PhD in neuroscience. So she got diagnosed in October 2018. And in July, that's my first question to you, we went to the family doctor here in Toronto that know her for more than 10 years. She never came in for no reason. So then she was complaining, but it came out my brain. I don't know what she complained at that day, and I was with her, but it was my only child, so I forget everything. And the family doctor sent us to make that swallow test, that barium swallow. So we came back, and he was smiling. He said, oh, you have no threatening illness, so everything is fine. So other days, she traveled for her work and a congress in Africa, and then back, congress in London, UK. So she had some symptoms, so she called the doctor there. And they said, oh, that's stress because you moved now 3 times and a new partner, a new job, and you have 3, 4 jobs, so it's stress, no worries. So you look fine, and you are you're intelligent. You would say no if something is very wrong with you. So my daughter came home, and everything was the old. So then in October, end October, she came back to Toronto to address a very important congress here. And then she felt sick in the plane, very, very sick, and throwing up. And so then this same doctor sent her to the right test to make the endoscopy. So then the doctor could not go through her the junction. So that doctor had to call 2 other doctors to help that the tube come through. So then I think they diagnosed her with stage 4 or 3. I don't know. I cannot remember 3 or 4. But then she got very urgent a chemo, but they never offered a surgery. That's my important question to you. Why did they not took part of the esophagus then, because it was on the junction, and the stomach out, and it was spread to the lymph nodes and to the liver. But why did they not do a surgery? What do you think? That's my question. And what they did not offer a trial. They never talked about a trial. And the 8 first chemos were doing spectacular well. And then she moved back to UK. She got more 4 there that was not working at all. And then she got ascites in April. And again, they misdiagnosed her with ascites. So they said it's gas in the intestine and constipation. So she got 15 liters of fluid in her belly. Then they put a drain in, and she died in May. I think consequences to the ascites because she could not get other chemo. But why did they not offer a trial if here are many trials or so what? That bugs my mind every day. Thank you so much.
First, I just want to say how I'm really sorry to hear about this story. So you raised 3 or 4 points there. First point about why patients sometimes don't go for surgery. So if the cancer is so advanced, if it's in stage 4, it's considered to be inoperable because the idea is even if we took out the stomach, the tumor cells are already everywhere. So it really doesn't give you a chance of survival. Plus the fact that the surgery is not a minor surgery, it's a massive surgery, and if your body's not strong enough to tolerate the surgery, it's simply too dangerous. The second point you've raised is why hasn't this been diagnosed? So you mentioned the Barham study. Barham studies are not as sensitive of a test as upper endoscopy. It's perhaps more available, but upper endoscopy is really the gold standard to diagnose this. And unless you work in this field, unless you're a gastric cancer specialist, gastric cancer is simply not on family doctors' radar. It's not. Like, I'm an internal medicine physician. I'm more or less frontline. And for the vast majority of us, stomach cancer is never the first thing we think of with any of these symptoms. So it's on nobody's radar unless you work in that specific field. And so that's why my message is to really raise awareness and lower the threshold at which to send patients for upper endoscopy. And the third point being clinical trials. So clinical trials, again, are it's a little finicky because they have very strict criteria. Like, for example, some clinical trials would say you can only get pembrolizumab if you fail chemotherapy, or you can only get it if you're in stage 4. We can't offer it to you when you're stage 2 as a first line. Those are examples of different criteria for clinical trials. They're very, very specific, and that's why clinical trials are never, it's not ideal as a universal therapy to access certain drugs. Yep.
So I'm really sorry, we're gonna have to cut off the questions and save them for the panel discussion, so please save your questions. I just wanted to say thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Terrence. Thank you so much, Terrence. Your insight is amazing as a doctor and as a patient. I think you're so on the ball with the questions that I think, all the patients have here. So thank you so much for your input. Thank you. The next person or people that I would like to invite are our dietitian speakers. So Denise Gabrielson and Ala El Danab. So Denise has been with us from the very beginning. So from the very first conference that we had, she has been shedding light on how do you eat with stomach cancer. And then Ala, she is new to us, but we're very excited to hear her insight because I think this is a very hot topic in gastric cancer. How do you eat without a stomach? How do you eat with stomach cancer? How do you eat when you don't want to eat? So please welcome them. Thank you.
So I'd just like to thank Teresa and Katie for inviting us to speak with you about nutrition and stomach cancer today. As you can glean from Terence, and also if you were able to read some of the quotes from which Katie and Teresa asked patients and what they wanted their doctors to know about stomach cancer, nutrition is one of the biggest challenges that patients with stomach cancer face. What to eat, when to eat, how much to eat. So preparing meals can certainly be a burden, particularly when you're already faced with symptoms that can affect the desire to eat. So today we're going to touch briefly on some common nutrition challenges with stomach cancer, and we're also going to offer some practical tips and strategies offer practical starting points for meals that can work before, during, and after treatment. So malnutrition and weight loss affects more than 70% of people diagnosed with stomach cancer, and this is often because of a lot of the symptoms that are present before diagnosis that we'll go into in some detail later on. So eating well before treatment, as Terence said, he was advised to put on a lot of weight before surgery. So eating well before treatment means you can start treatment with adequate stores of important nutrients like protein and vitamins and minerals that you need for recovery. And people who maintain good nutrition during treatment and who are able to maintain a healthy weight during treatment often respond better to treatment, have fewer side effects, have fewer treatment delays, recover more quickly, and have a better quality of life. Getting enough nutrients through food can also help to protect against infection and also helps to repair damaged tissues. So when we talk about eating well, what we're talking about is getting a variety of foods that will offer nutrients like carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, which are nutrients that we need in larger amounts for the body, and also smaller nutrients like vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals that we need in smaller amounts. So protein is needed for building and maintaining muscle mass and also repairing damaged tissues that can happen from treatment and also keeping the immune system healthy. Carbohydrates are a major source of energy from the body and are present in foods like rice, pasta, quinoa, and also contain fiber and vitamins and minerals that we need. Fat is another major source of energy for the body, and we often use this to help optimize energy intake when eating is not going so well, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And fruits and vegetables can provide fiber, vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals, which I mentioned are needed in small amounts to help the body function properly. So while we generally recommend to continue with a healthy diet during treatment and during recovery, it's important to acknowledge that nutrition needs and the ability to follow specific dietary recommendations will vary at different stages of treatment and recovery. So there are many challenges that may arise. So one of the first challenges is often, as I mentioned, people will present with eating difficulty either prior to diagnosis or at the time of diagnosis. And these can include feeling very full quickly on a small amount of food, heartburn or indigestion, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and loss of appetite. And all of these things can lead to weight loss and loss of muscle mass. As Taryn mentioned, chemotherapy can also make it very difficult to eat, as well as radiation. So these can also lead to nausea and vomiting, loss of appetite, feeling full quickly, and also taste changes, mouth sores, and changes in bowel habits. and surgery. So there are lots of challenges associated with having part of your stomach removed or all of your stomach removed. So weight loss, as mentioned, is a big thing that can happen after surgery. And part of that is because of decreased capacity for food and lack of desire to eat food. Feeling full quickly, there's a complication of dumping syndrome, reflux, dysmotility, which can be your stomach emptying either too slow or what's left of your stomach emptying too slow, or your stomach emptying too fast. And malabsorption of nutrients through food, and some people may also experience lactose intolerance. So while we're not going to go into great detail about symptom management for these particular symptoms in this presentation, as we're going to focus on more meal planning tips, you can go to the My Gut Feeling website to access previous nutrition presentations in which I did speak about symptom management a little bit more.
So it's important to know that everyone is going to have a different journey through treatment. And oftentimes clients will come and say, well, this certain thing worked for one person, but it's not necessarily going to work for you. But it's important to eat as best as you can. So this has come up in conversation before where individuals really don't know where to start. They don't know how to prepare meals or what to prepare. Now, these are some of the strategies that we've prepared for you. The most important thing that we start to talk about is to try to pick a time during the week where you can plan ahead. Plan your snacks, plan your meals, maybe 2 or 3 days ahead of time. Involve your family, involve your friends, involve all the caregivers. Choose meals that work well for you, and stock the kitchen with easy to prepare meals, right? It might be best to prepare large batches of food, just so it can make, meal prep less burdensome. So if you are preparing something that requires, a big pack of chicken, try to think of other meals where you can prepare that chicken with, right? If you do have that small appetite, try to portion out some of that meal into a smaller plate, for instance. It'll make it less burdensome to eat. So maximizing your nutrition. So keeping within this theme of, early satiety, lack of intake, that lack of desire to eat, trying to maximize your nutrition through high protein and high calorie foods will be very important because we do want to try to, maintain your weight and maintain that lean body mass. So eating small, frequent meals, when Dr. Lee presented, he said, I just didn't have that hunger sense anymore. So trying to work around the clock, maybe eating or aiming to eat every 1 to 2 hours is a good way to try to get in more calories. And limit, those low energy foods. So fruits and vegetables are great, but try to maximize on those foods. So if you are preparing, a salad, for instance, try to, add in some avocado, a good healthy fat. Try to add in, a source of protein like chicken or beans and lentils. Pick higher fat sauces or dressing just to try to boost that calorie content. And prioritize. So you really are trying to prioritize those high calorie, high protein foods. So this is a real life diet example that we often get when people are, first diagnosed. So as you can see, there's small portions, right? And when we were talking about those high calorie, high protein foods, it's quite lacking. If you look at the total calories for that day, it's around 1,400 calories and around 60 grams of protein. So when we try to modify this meal plan, by trying to add higher calorie foods and high protein foods, this is what we sort of achieve. So we'll break it down a little bit. So for breakfast, we still had those eggs, right? But we're changing the cooking method a little bit. So trying to change the cooking method will try to give you some leeway to add more volume into your meals. So if you look, we've cooked with oil. So oil is a great way to try to add some calories, but we've also added a source of protein and fat with the cheese. So with the lunch and similar to the snack, we're adding more protein. So if you look at the lunch option, we've added a source of protein by just adding 2 ounces of chicken. And that is quite minimal. If you think about, the size of your palm, it's less than that. It's around, a quarter cup of some chopped chicken, and it's a very easy way to try to get some protein in. And the same with the snack. So the fruit is wonderful, but you want to try to add a protein source. So that's, 100 grams of yogurt. If you think about your Activia cup, that little portion size, that's how much it would equate to. And then for the dinner, we just added a source of carbohydrate, which is, that potato with some source of fat with the sour cream. So these, in total, they're very small changes that we've made, but it really, added up to a lot. So if you look at the calorie content, that's around 1,800 calories, which increased from the previous calorie content by 30%, and then protein by 60%. So you have around 103 grams. So again, these are very small changes. We're working with what you have, but we're trying to improve on what you're doing. So modifying your meals for texture. So as we sort of talked about before, sometimes, especially post-surgery, tolerating solids might be quite difficult, so you may need to, further modify on your meals and the texture of the meals. So using cooking methods that will moisten, your food, like steaming, broiling, or boiling, stewing, you can steam your vegetables, for instance, especially with some vegetables that have tough, surfaces, shells, you may want to remove that. And trying to add some moisture with your meals. So, a piece of, let's say, steak, you might want to cut it up a little bit and add some gravy on top, especially with the mashed potatoes, just to try to add some moisture so it'll go down a bit easier. And if foods are not smooth enough, you may want to use a food processor or a blender just to try to liquefy or puree that meal. And then you might want to use a strainer if there are certain clumps that may make it difficult to tolerate when you are swallowing. So here's another, example of a sample modified diet. So we've gone through from a regular type of diet to more of a pureed diet. So keep in mind that some individuals may not need to make that straight modification into a puree diet, but these are just options that we've sort of provided. You might be able to tolerate, so for example, for the dinner menu, you might be able to tolerate the fish, the baked fish, it might be soft enough, but if it's not, you can puree that option to make it softer. You can add some sauces like we've talked about. The roasted potatoes might be more difficult to swallow, and a mashed potato would be a great alternative. So here are some choices. Again, if you're able to tolerate a little bit of the solids but need to modify other things, that is another option as well.
So there are times when solid food may not be tolerated well, and you may need to get your nutrition through fluids. This can happen sometimes if the tumor is partially blocking food from either getting into the stomach or food from exiting the stomach. It could be used for a short period of time after having a stent insertion, either to keep the space between the esophagus and the stomach open, or the space between the stomach and the small bowel open. It could be needed for longer periods of time, either if your stent is not working well, or if your gastroenterologist might recommend staying on a fluid diet a little bit longer. Sometimes a fluid diet might be better tolerated if you have slow stomach emptying, that's very severe. And also during chemotherapy, a fluid diet might be helpful if you have mouth sores or a sore throat, and if a minced or pureed diet still is too hard to swallow. As you can see from our sample menu, it's still possible to get enough calories and protein through a full fluid diet to maintain weight and muscle mass if we focus on high calorie and high protein fluids. So using dairy, if tolerated, regular fat or high fat dairy can be a good way to get protein and calories. So milk or soy beverages, use of oral nutrition supplements or meal replacement drinks or smoothies can also be a rich source of calories and protein. For more savory options, using things like cream soups or blending soups with protein sources such as beans or meat, and also adding those fats to it, like maybe adding some extra oils to your soup to help boost the calorie content. If we think back to the eating well plate, you can round out the diet a little bit more by blending soups with rice or pasta. And you can also add vegetables by blending into soups or smoothies. You can blend fruit into smoothies. And then using things like juices or nectars instead of water for hydration can also help to get some vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. For certain people on a fluid diet, they may need to be worried a little bit more about the fiber content of the fluid diet. And in that case, some of these things might need to be strained. So while we did not focus on a lot of specific tips for symptom management, we did want to talk about some of the common nutrition challenges or problems that people living with stomach cancer might face. One of them is lactose intolerance. So that's the incomplete digestion or absorption of lactose, which is a sugar found in dairy products. It may occur after surgery, or sometimes if there's a prolonged period of diarrhea, for example, with chemotherapy. Symptoms include bloating, abdominal pain, diarrhea, cramping, or gas with lactose-containing foods or fluids. So to help with that, choosing lactose-free products or using an enzyme replacement like lactase, which is the enzyme needed to break down lactose, to be able to consume those lactose-containing foods or fluids. For some people, they can actually tolerate a small amount of lactose throughout the day, so choosing lower lactose foods like yogurt or buttermilk, or decreasing the number of servings of lactose-containing products over the course of the day might be sufficient. Drinking enough fluid. So I don't know if we want to show a show of hands for how many people here have trouble drinking fluid or water, or know someone who has trouble drinking fluid or water. Yeah. So one of the issues is it's hard to get enough fluid when you're advised to drink fluid 30 to 60 minutes before or after a meal, especially if you're at risk for dumping syndrome. So that can make it really challenging to get enough fluid through the course of the day. And while not studied, we do hear a lot of people who have difficulty, in particular, tolerating plain water. So that can make it really hard to get enough hydration throughout the day. So drinking small volumes throughout the day, so really small portions alternating with food, can sometimes help, particularly if you're at risk for dumping syndrome. Experimenting with the temperature of fluids. So sometimes warm fluids might be tolerated better than really hot fluids or cold fluids. And a lot of people have reported that rather than plain water, they find it easier to drink water that's been flavored. So using things like lemon slices, cucumber slices, mixed berries, or even packaged flavor mix-ins might help to get the water down. Also different fluids such as milk, soy beverages, diluted juices, decaf tea, or reduced sugar electrolyte drinks might be helpful. And gas and bloating is another very common symptom that people often have. It can occur with difficulty digesting and absorbing nutrition through food, and can also happen if the stomach is emptying too slowly. So if it's slow emptying, fluids might be helpful, or a texture-modified diet and lower fiber foods will empty a little bit quicker than higher fiber foods. Limiting gas-forming foods like cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and also beans and legumes. And also, depending on when the gas is happening and the bloating is happening, if it's after surgery, it usually will improve over time, so keep retrying foods. And there are times, no matter how hard you try, where you may feel like you're not getting enough nutrition through food. One of the important things to consider is managing your expectations. Where in your treatment or recovery are you? Have you just had surgery within the past year? It will take time to heal, so give yourself time to heal. And also, everyone adjusts to these things at a different pace. It is the case that some people may never return to their usual body weight or their pre-diagnosis weight, and perhaps it's better to focus on other measures of nutritional status, such as an energy level. So how do you feel? How is your energy level? Are you able to do the activities that you would like to do versus focusing on a number on the scale? And certainly there are people who will continue to lose weight without trying, and it's important to speak with your healthcare team if you're having trouble with weight loss and getting enough nutrition through food. And sometimes, despite strategies to help get enough nutrition through food, alternate routes of feeding may be required, such as enteral nutrition, which is feeding through a tube. So similar to what Terrence mentioned, getting a feeding tube like a J tube to get supplemental nutrition. Sometimes this can be placed if you're not getting enough nutrition through food, or maybe placed at the time of surgery if the recovery is expected to be prolonged. Or sometimes total parenteral nutrition or nutrition by vein if it's not possible to use a feeding tube to get enough nutrition. So your dietitian and healthcare team can discuss if this is an appropriate option for you, can talk about the risks and benefits, and what the appropriate route or regimen might be. So these are some resources that we'd like to include that you can look to for more information. And we hope that we've given you some practical tips about managing meals during treatment and recovery. And we're happy to take questions, although I think we're pretty short on time.
Question, more like a statement. But anytime, to me, it seems logical, anytime that the gut is failing, you have to bypass it by using intravenous, especially when it comes to nutrition, and even the medications that's being administered has to bypass the malfunctioning alimentary canal and go straight into the bloodstream. That's what I would recommend, and I'd recommend that this be done slowly overnight in a slow drip IV.
I think that certainly there are cases where nutrition through intravenous is definitely indicated when there is significant gut failure or we're absolutely not able to use the gut. But there is also evidence showing that if there is some function to the gut, that's really the method that we should use first. And part of that has to do with risks and benefits associated with intravenous nutrition, and also keeping what's remaining of the gut healthy by actually using it.
May I ask you what's meant by the term dumping syndrome? I don't understand that.
So oftentimes when you undergo a very significant surgery, sometimes the physiology of your stomach is different. When you eat, food just dumps right into what's remaining really into your system. So sometimes you're not able to digest certain food, and that can cause or lead to other symptoms like diarrhea, weight loss, because you're not able to absorb the nutrition. So we call that dumping syndrome. Yeah.
Question. I have a question with respect to vegetables.
Yes.
So we all know vegetables are important to flavonoids, vitamins, etc. But without a stomach, digesting leafy greens is extremely challenging. We know that cows have 4 stomachs, but they eat grass all day long, and so they're allowed to eat grass because they have 4 stomachs. What do you do when you have 0 stomachs?
And sometimes, you may just need to, further modify. So, sometimes if you want to do more of a pureed or more of a softer vegetable, that may make it easier for you to digest. But if you can't tolerate vegetables, then I guess you don't necessarily have to do it for the time being until you're able to sort of adjust later on. Things may change down the line.
Do you have specific vegetables you would recommend?
It's very individualized, yeah.
Sometimes leafy greens that cook down really soft are easy, like spinach, for example. So cooked spinach might be very easy to blend very smoothly into a smoothie. You can also blenderize spinach into like a muffin batter and make like a spinach muffin if something like a muffin is easy for you to eat.
Yeah, you can incorporate it, for example, in an omelet or anything like that, just to soften it and make it easier to go down. Yeah.
What about carbohydrates? My challenge is carbohydrates. When I eat them, my blood sugar is lower to the point where I actually have seizures. Is that common? I'm not sure how much of your stomach you have left, but Okay, so sometimes that can that can be a result of just misalignment of your digestive enzymes. So, you know, they have to come down from your small bowel, which is in a different spot, and sometimes that doesn't coordinate with when the food is actually getting down. So that carbohydrate will stimulate an insulin response, but it's not matching up with when the enzymes are coming down for digestion that can help to keep your blood sugar up. So it's usually a misalignment of the enzymes meeting up with the digestion. One of the things that might help is choosing lower fiber sources of carbohydrate that might go into the bloodstream a little bit more quickly. Yeah. Yeah.
I have no stomach either, and if I have too many carbs, I actually get a sugar drop. Yes. And I get shaky and and I have to eat sugar right away. But I have seizures if I just. Oh no, yeah, I'm not to that point, but I actually feel a diabetic response to the dropping of the glucose. And it was so funny because when we were having breakfast this morning, I looked at the croissant and I was like, oh God, I'd love to have that right now. But I knew better because first thing in the morning on an empty stomach to have the carb, I would be shaky all day. Yeah, I still do it, but I'm not good. I'm 10 years not without a stomach. You would think I would know better. And I still don't.
I think we have a question online.
Okay.
And also, just once again, if you have a question, just put your hand up and wait for the mic to come to you, because those that are watching can't hear your questions, and they're so important that we want everyone to hear. But that's okay.
So we actually have a couple questions online. I will just start with one for now. My gastroenterologist recommended I supplement my diet with MCT oil because it is so readily absorbed. I didn't come close to retaining my pre-surgery weight, but I think I'd weigh less without the MCT oil trick. Is this common for people like us without stomachs?
Yes, so it would be very common, and the reason being is because the MCT oil is readily absorbed, whereas sometimes with individuals without a stomach may experience fatty stools, so the fat is not being able to be absorbed properly, so the MCT oil is an option. Yeah.
And then another question is, after almost 12 years post-TG, I eat everything in high amount of calories, but still can't gain weight. Do people with 10 plus years, who have had stomach cancer for 10 plus years, who are able to stick to such a dedicated plan and are able to gain weight? Sorry.
Yes, that does happen, and I think Teresa could probably lend some support to that. But as I mentioned, some people may not be able to gain that weight back, and it can be a challenge. And I think it's important to look at other measures of nutritional health, so paying attention to how you feel and how you're functioning. And if you feel okay and you're functioning okay, and you're not losing weight and muscle mass, then kind of trying to go with that rather than focusing so much on trying to get the weight back to where it was before.
So I actually have a question. In our bags, we have something that is a complete meal replacement. How would people use that? So how would you use something like a liquid form? What's the best way to incorporate that? Would it be in a soup? Could you pour it into something?
Yeah, so oftentimes the oral nutrition supplements, so things like Ensure, in the bags you have something called Complete, which is a complete organic formula made of whole foods. So usually I would recommend putting them into, if you can't take it straight from the bottle, you can incorporate them into your smoothies, you can incorporate them into soups. I've had a patient try the Complete warmed up. She actually warmed it up a little bit, and it did turn out kind of, it tasted really nice. She kind of used it as a soup method. So that's another way that she can sort of get more calories and protein in. You can also try it more as like a medication, sort of, instead of drinking water with your medications, you can portion out a small amount in a cup and then take that with your medications if there are no food nutrient or drug nutrient interactions with your medications.
Sometimes it just gives a little bit more variety. People get they get taste fatigue with the sweet nutrition supplements or meal replacement drinks, so it's just another option. Also, if you're on a pureed diet, it does take some work to do a pureed diet, and if you're in a pinch, then you can use something that's already been blended for you.
I'm 10 years out, and I find that it's very hard to maintain the weight, extremely hard. I mean, you literally have to work at it, and I have to remind myself to eat. But I feel hunger. I do feel hunger, so I'm okay with that. And like I said, I'm from the United States, and Halloween helped me a great deal with all the candy that I consumed. But what I actually find is, instead of doing meals, I kind of graze. And I'm actually eating better than I should have been before, because I'm eating 6 to 8 smaller meals per day than I am the larger meals, which I can't accept anyway, because that wreaks all kinds of havoc. But I find that if I graze throughout the day, I do a lot better than if I try to eat the 3 meals. That's number one. Number two, any kind of supplement for me, like an Ensure or a Boost, gave me dumping syndrome right away. The sugar content is absolutely ridiculous. So instead of trying to supplement my diet with Ensure, Boost, or anything else, I really try to maintain it by eating food. The alternative to an Ensure Boost, for anybody that's listening without a stomach, and this works, okay? In the States, we have Carnation Instant Breakfast. They sell a low sugar version of it. Now, when I was going through chemo, my doctor wanted me to have 6 to 8 smoothies of this a day, which, forget it, you can't do. But I find now, I had dropped down. I had a hospital stay in March, and I had lost a lot of weight, and I was trying to bulk up again. And what I'll do with this, and I have it in my cabinet now, and I notice that if I have a couple days, like after being here, this is gonna wreak havoc on my system, and I'll probably drop 5 to 10 pounds. So, because I'm not home grazing the entire time. And as an aside, my husband's gained like 40 pounds because I'm constantly eating. Then I love to eat with him. So anyway, so what I'll do is I'll take a Carnation Instant Breakfast, low sugar. It's gotta be low sugar. And I'll mix it with fruit, peanut butter, a banana, Greek yogurt, and strawberries. Make a smoothie out of it. And then I'll have that like 2 times a day is what I can tolerate. And that will also help supplement and kind of, if you feel yourself losing the weight and you want to try to gain the weight back quicker, if I put 2 to 3 of them in my diet a day, I find that that helps me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, those are all excellent, excellent strategies. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you to Denise and Ala. I have to tell you that during our support groups, diet and nutrition are the #1 topic of conversation. We must spend, and any of you that have joined will know that we spend about 90% of our time talking about, what are you eating? What's working for you? We had one whole discussion on a brand new milk product that my husband actually introduced me to that was lactose-free and high protein. So we were talking about that, and then everyone went out and bought it. So please do share your bits and tidbits of advice. We will have a break, and then we'll have lunch, so you can share at that time, and we will have a 20-minute panel discussion, so you can ask more questions. Our next speaker is George Hall. And George joined our group about, I would say, 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. Now, George and I bonded immediately because we both have Lynch syndrome, but I'll let him speak to that. George is 62, and he just retired recently from the TTC after being there for over 30 years. So we were thrilled when he retired because we knew he needed to. And I call George our super survivor. So please welcome George Hall.
How you doing? There we go. I did this morning just so you can know what I'm coming from. That's enough. Yeah. That was Tub Thumping from Chawamba. And apparently that was a group, an Irish group, that was in complete disarray. These guys had no idea what they wanted to do with their lives, so they came up with this song because just to get them going in a direction. Sorry. Okay. Clean eyeglasses with cloth, check. Did that. Oh, caution, use this technique only when the brain draws a blank, emotional overload, or discreetly passing wind. Hi, I'm George. Like Teresa said, I'm 62. I retired from the TTC about a year ago after 31 years of service. I was born actually in St. Mike's. I'm a St. Mike's baby. I've got 2 daughters, adult, and 2 grandsons. My wife and I have been together for over 27 years. My surgeries, I've had a few. I've had colon surgery, duodenal pancreas, melanoma on my right nostril, a surgical hernia, that was huge, a melanoma on the right wrist, and I had stage 3 stomach cancer. Right now, thankfully, I am currently NED, no evidence of disease, but I'm still at risk, so I'll cross that bridge if I come to it. In late 2010, I went for a routine colonoscopy and an upper endoscopy because at that time, the TTC doctor had this program he had just started. Basically, it said, if you're over 50 years old, go get checked. So I'm glad I did because I didn't have any unusual symptoms whatsoever, except for like routine exhaustion, irregular, sometimes unpredictable eating and hydration times due to work schedules, very irregular bathroom breaks, and the constant reminders that my riders are paying my salary, so hop to it. And that's what we operators jokingly call TTC normal. I was shocked to find out I had stage 2 cancer in the duodenal pancreas junction and stage 3 cancer in 2 places in my colon. I had both at the same time. I had a Whipple surgery done in 2011. It was a lengthy surgery performed using 2 shifts of surgical teams. Kudos to Dr. Stotland's team, which was the first one, and to Dr. Law's team, a member of which is actually present today. Luckily, I slept through the whole thing, so it was all right. My only complication was that, unbeknownst to me, I was allergic to latex. So halfway through the first surgery, which was the colonectomy, everything had to be shut down and started all over with latex-free products. Lost my spot. Yeah, that was something bad to find out right in the middle of such a difficult surgery. My recovery after surgery was as expected, lots of pain, weakness, multiple tubes interfering with my breathing and movement. All of this was to be expected, but what I hadn't expected was how much harder this experience was for my caregiver, Nancy. I had firsthand knowledge of what was going wrong with me. I knew every pain, every lack of feeling or feeling that I had. I could tell myself, okay, I hurt, but things are gonna get better day by day. I can do this. My wife, she wasn't so lucky. She could only imagine what I was going through. Let's face it, nobody under-imagines the effect of a traumatic and life-changing surgery. She couldn't feel what I could feel, so she had no points of reference except for her fears of what her fears and worries projected into her imagination. I'm sure now that when she asked how was I doing, how was I feeling, I didn't help by trying to make her feel reassured and saying that the things that would make her worry less, sorry. Probably felt insincere to her and fueled her imagining even worse scenarios. It didn't help that the medical staff suspected I had contracted C. difficile and had put me into isolation. I'll spare you those crappy details. I just thought, cool, private room. But words like major surgery, Whipple procedure, C. difficile, and isolation don't really say, oh good, he's healing just fine. I was weak as a kitten, everything hurt and itched, and tubes were always uncomfortable and were driving me nuts. I remember being told to cough, and I couldn't even imagine that, and I thought, boy, I'm gonna be here for months. Surprise, 7 days later, without warning, I was discharged. Didn't have any clothing with me, only the hospital diapers, which are not anywhere near as good as Depends. No ride home, and no one informed my wife. She found out after she had taken 3 buses to visit me. Luckily, she found the only person available to take me home was a friend of ours named Karen. She's a senior citizen who's a paraplegic, and she picked me up in her wheelchair electric van. But she did tell me that if need be, she would have taken me home on her lap, on her electric wheelchair. Luckily, I didn't have any luggage or even a toothbrush. Sorry. Oh, but the hospital did give me a set of self-care instructions to take home, and they did set up a home nurse to visit me daily. This was before the current health cut regime that was just voted in. A week after that, my nurse noticed that my stomach drainage tube was still discharging all kinds of pus and goop. So she insisted I get back to emergency as soon as possible and take care of it there. The emergency staff was surprised that I'd been sent home after such a surgery without any antibiotics, but the new antibiotics cleared everything up fairly quickly. I had undergone chemo before the surgery and resumed chemo after surgery. I was able to withstand 10 of 12 months before we had to discontinue due to peripheral neuropathy in my extremities. And some extremities are just too valuable to lose voluntarily. Male pride. I worked hard to strengthen myself because I enjoy being useful to society. I kept telling myself I've had broken bones that were harder to overcome. Watching TV does get old pretty fast for me, so after 1.5 years, my doctors agreed that I was ready to re-enter the workforce. I sent an email to the current manager of my home division advising of my intention to return to work full-time. This caught him completely off guard as too many of the other employees were trying to get out of working. I told them that I missed the camaraderie of the fellow employees, the gratification of being useful and giving a needed service, and of course the pay. My sick benefits were barely covering my rent. So the TTC HR department thoroughly retested me physically and mentally to make sure that I was no danger to the public. I did pass. I continued to work even though over time I developed this massive retro-incisional hernia on my abdomen, reminiscent of the various Alien movies just before the debut of the above-mentioned Alien. It really did grow fast. Kudos to Dr. Brenneman for his excellent surgery in October. 2017, a year of skin cancers for me. I had a growth called a keratocanthoma. It erupted like a little pimple on my right nostril, but boy, it grew fast. It was removed surgically, but didn't heal because I was wearing a CPAP at the time at night, and the irritation just didn't let it heal. In September, I had one on my thumb, on the right wrist. That was removed without problem. That brings me to the most recent surgery. After a routine 6-month endoscopy, my lovely gastroenterologist, Dr. Shapira, was tearfully discussing with me that I would need a total gastrectomy as soon as possible. I was booked on the first available elective surgery of that year. A Roux-en-Y esophagojejunoscopy was successful. I had to relearn how to portion control my eating and drinking for my new state of being. I learned about dumping syndrome, Peggy was asking, and the associated symptoms. I learned that my esophagus was now attached to my jejunum, which was now acting as my digestive system. I discovered that too much food hitting the jejunum too fast was not an enjoyable experience. At times, I forget myself, and I eat as I've done for the last 60 years, which usually means, uh-oh, I kind of need to vomit the excess back up with all that thick phlegm that my system just created to expel it. This, unfortunately, led to my early retirement from driving the subway, since I felt that stopping the train due to my personal need to vomit out the window without decapitating my head on a subway signal tree was just not good customer service. And the workers at track level readily agreed with me. I had put in over 30 years, so I thought, okay, all good things must end. Another compelling factor was the occasional insulin dump. I think Peggy was asking here the question. About an hour after eating, my insulin and blood sugar would just go crazy, give me heavy sweats, light sensitivity, dizziness, fatigue, and a disability to perform simple tasks safely. And let's not forget the unexpected diarrhea that happens when there's no bathroom anywhere near you. After the Whipple, I was asked to submit to genetic DNA testing. That's where I met Melanie. And I discovered that I have Lynch syndrome. My mother, 2 of my brothers, and 1 daughter have also been tested and found to have Lynch as well. And my maternal grandparents showed signs that they had had Lynch before they passed. Now, I'm an old dog, and overcoming 6 decades of gobbling my food mindlessly, it's a difficult habit to break, even with my lovely wife's constant reminders like, slow down, put your fork down for a minute or 2, or, my God, are you ever gonna learn? But I feel that I can learn to nourish myself and prove that I live without a stomach. And by the way, I just spent a week at a 5-star all-inclusive resort earlier this month. I gained 6 pounds. It was a wonderful vacation, and it proved that I can do more than live without a stomach. I can live well. Thank you. Any questions? Cool. Thank you.
Isn't George just an all-star and a comedian? That was great. Thank you so much, George, for sharing. The next person I would like to invite is actually joining us virtually, all the way from the United Kingdom. So Dr. Bilal, and I'm so sorry if I'm saying the last name wrong, Bilal Al-Kafaf, we approached us in Prague during the International Gastric Cancer Conference, and he has kindly requested to join us to talk about gastric cancer in the world. So all the way from the United Kingdom, Dr. Bilal Al-Kafaf.
Right, can everybody hear me? Very good, okay, well thank you very much for having me today. Katie and Teresa, really enjoying your glasses today, they look really smart. Fine, so what I've been asked to talk about really is our study. And our study is an example of how patients and healthcare professionals can be partners in research, particularly in gastric cancer. So one of the reasons I couldn't be with you today and I was invited to come across is this lady. So she arrived last Friday. So unfortunately, I couldn't make the trip across the North Atlantic Ocean to be with you. However, Manchester is in the north of England. It has a population of about 3.5 million, and we're going to talk about a little bit about gastric cancer and the study that we're running. Just a bit of history about where I come from and where I work. So the hospital that I work at is Salford Royal Foundation Trust. It's a large university hospital in the north of England, opened approximately 200 years ago, and this is a picture of it approximately 120 odd years ago. And this is where we are now. So things have moved on, and we've talked quite a lot about allied health professionals and teamwork and working in teams. And this is just, I guess, an acknowledgement that I play a very small part in a much larger team. And this group probably represents less than about 25% of all the people that help provide treatment and management for our patients with gastric cancer, certainly in Manchester. So let's talk about this research study. So I want you to imagine that it's time to buy a car, and you have to choose between a Ferrari and a Porsche, but it's quite a lot of money to pay out. So how are you going to choose between the two? Well, you go online and you have a look at some reviews. The first review compares the two cars with respect to performance and uses top speed, and the Ferrari is faster than the Porsche. The fuel consumption is the next thing that's looked at, and they're about equal, and it looks at urban fuel consumption to compare the two. And then the other factor that is compared is the engine. And when we compare all three different categories or characteristics, we see that the Ferrari is the outright winner. However, it's a lot of money to depart with, so you go and have a look at a different review. Now, this review looks at performance, not in terms of top speed, but in terms of time taken to get from 0 to 62 miles an hour. Then looks at fuel consumption as extra urban fuel consumption. And then finally looks at the engine in terms of maximum torque. And this review has the Porsche as the outright winner. So now you have two different reviews, each saying different things. So you go to a third review. This time performance is looked at in terms of time to travel a quarter of a mile. Fuel consumption is looked at by comparing combined fuel consumption. And there is no talk of the engine at all. And in this review, both cars are identical. And you can make these comparisons with anything. It doesn't just have to be cars. It can be which is better, Pepsi or Coca-Cola, which is better, Samsung or iPhone, or when you're choosing which city break you want to fly out to. So how do we choose? What do we base our choices on? It's difficult. Let's move towards gastric cancer now. So what we know about gastric cancer is it's a leading cause of cancer-related death worldwide. And the bottom line is survival rates have not improved over the last 4 decades. Whichever way we want to dress things, regardless of the multimodal therapies, the chemotherapy, we've heard about immunotherapy today, survival has not improved over the last 4 decades. What we also know is that the only way that we can potentially cure cancer of the stomach is through surgery. But what we don't know is which is the best surgical approach in order to do that. And the way that we should be basing our choices as to which surgery is best for gastric cancer is through evidence by comparing and combining data and results from lots of different research studies. Let's take open or minimally invasive surgery. We heard from the first speaker already who talked about that there was a plan for him to have minimally invasive surgery, and they weren't able to do that, so they converted to open surgery. So how do we decide which is better, minimally invasive or open surgery? Well, in the same way that we look at the two vehicles, or a Coke and a Pepsi, etc., we compare surgeries or surgical interventions or treatments by using this term called outcomes. Now, outcomes are effects or an impact of a treatment. So in one research study, what we might do is look at outcomes in terms of survival, who survived, how many people survive 5 years. We may also want to measure the differences in terms of recovery with respect to pain, how much pain we get in either operation. And then we may even want to look at how good the operation is in terms of removing cancer. So we may want to use the number of lymph glands or the lymph nodes that are removed. And that's in one research study. And in the same way, when you have a look at the different vehicle reviews, when we look at another research study, which purports to compare open surgery and minimally invasive surgery, we see that the outcomes that are being reported are entirely different. So, for example, survival outcomes are no longer 5 years, but may be measured in terms of 3 years. A recovery is not looked at in terms of pain, but in terms of how long patients stay in hospital. And then finally, the surgical technique, instead of looking at how many lymph nodes are removed, they may be looking at the amount of bleeding. So how do we decide which is better? And what do we base our choices on? It's difficult. What's important, and what I want to try and get across today, is that we must speak the same language. So let's have a look at how outcomes are reported in surgical trials for gastric cancer. We undertook something called a systematic review, where we looked at every single surgical trial over the last 20 years, and we examined how outcomes were reported, which outcomes were reported, when they were reported, and how they were measured. And what we found was that the outcomes that were reported were different in all the trials. Everyone was measuring different things. When the same outcomes were reported, often the definitions for those outcomes were different. So, for example, death after surgery. You would think that that was pretty straightforward, but actually there were 5 different definitions of death after surgery. When they're measured as well. So we've already described some people are measuring after 5 years, some after 3 years. So everyone's doing slightly different. The other thing we looked at is quality of life. So quality of life after surgery is very rarely measured in these large trials. So we found only 3 out of 30 research trials bothered to measure quality of life after surgery. And as you'll all agree, this is something quite ridiculous. What about the patient priorities? What about what is important to patients? Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is run research trials for the benefits of patients. So we undertook a study looking at patient priorities. We had 20 patients who were interviewed just to find out what their priorities were after surgery, which outcomes were important to them. And what we looked at here, and what we also did, was compare the outcomes which were reported in the trials over the last 20 years and compared them to the priorities that patients told us were important. What I want you to focus on is the picture on the right-hand side here. So the areas that patients particularly focused on were things like GI symptoms, the psychological impact of surgery, weight loss. We've heard about weight loss, fatigue, returning to normality. We've heard a talk about the difficulties of eating following gastrectomy. And what we've also found is that these priorities were not reflected in surgical trials over the last 2 decades. So there's a big disparity here. We claim research is for the benefits of patients, but unfortunately, the outcomes that are important to patients are not being reported in surgical trials. So how can we address this challenge? And it is a big challenge, a challenge which runs through not just for this particular research field, gastric cancer, but all other research fields within the medical profession. So we want to develop something called a core outcome set, and we're well into the process. And I want to share with you some of the results that we have already. So what is a core outcome set? Well, a core outcome set is an agreed collection of outcomes which are standardized. They should be defined in the same way, and they should be measured and reported by everybody as a minimum within the field of gastric cancer surgery. So we want to standardize the most important, the critically important outcomes, and make everybody report them in all future trials. So that way we'll be able to compare, so that way the trials will be comparing all the same outcomes in the same way, and we'll be able to really answer that question of which is the best surgical approach, for gastric cancer. So, what do we think this is? And what about if we did this? What is it now? Right. So, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So, for example, we thought that was a duck firsthand, but then things changed and it looked like a rabbit. And this is the essence of this study. The essence of this study is that when we decide what, when, and how we should be measuring outcomes, it's not just about what is important to the medical professionals and the healthcare professionals, but it's also about what the patients feel are important, because research is not just for the medical profession, but in fact, it should be mainly for the benefit of patients. So how do we develop a core outcome set? Are you able to hear me? Yeah, okay. So how do we develop this core outcome set? Well, there's three main steps. And the first step is trying to identify which outcomes might be important in the first instance. And there's two ways in which we do this. Number one, we looked at the outcomes which were reported in the literature, the scientific literature, and the journals over the last 20 years, and we listed them. And there were probably around 400 different outcomes which were reported over the last 20 years. We then, through the interviews that we collected, the interviews that we undertook with the patients, we identified some more outcomes. And we put those two sets of outcomes together in a super long list. The next step after that was to bring that list down to a manageable number and then prioritize that list such that we then had our core group of outcomes. And over the last year, we have had a huge amount of support from patients, nurses, and surgeons from around the world, and I'll share some of the outcomes with you, some of the results of the study. We were able to translate the survey into 8 different languages, and we asked surgeons, patients, and nurses to prioritize the long list of outcomes such that we would then move on to have a core outcome set to be used by all future surgical trials in gastric cancer. The future work that we want to then undertake is to quality assure the process and understand when we know what outcomes we want to measure so that we can then move on to deciding when they should be measured and how they should be measured. And they are two different things completely. So Therese asked me about how this study may be relevant to patients. And what I want to really share with you is how patients have partnered with us to augment this study. It would have been quite easy, and we've seen quite a lot of core outcome set studies in other fields to simply rely on the opinions of medical experts. But we've already demonstrated through our research that what experts in the medical field think does not necessarily reflect what the priorities of patients are. So it was very important from the outset to involve patients at every step of the study. We had patients involved in the preparation of the study. So we have within our study management group, which oversees the delivery of the study, we have patient representatives. Patients also reviewed our funding application to ensure that it made sense, that the lay, simple English application version was understandable. We had patient help in recruitment for our interviews and also our international online survey. And certainly Therese and Katie and my gut feeling were instrumental in that from North America. We then had patients have an important input in the translation of these online surveys. They piloted surveys, making sure that it made sense, making sure that there weren't any grammatical errors, and that things and explanations were very clear. And then finally, the patients help us execute the study. They were recruited within the online survey and gave us the answers really that we wanted to hear from patients. And these are some of the patients that were involved in the study preparation. These are some of the patients from Manchester. And as I explained to you, patients are simply, they're not just people who we operate on, but patients are why we do research. And it's vitally important that they're involved in every step of the process. I want to explain to you, share with you some of the results of the online survey. So we had well over 1,000 people from nearly 60 different countries participate in this survey to tell us which of the outcomes that we presented to them were critically important to them. And what's especially important here is that 1/3 of participants were patients. So we had over 300 patients from all across the globe to help us decide which of the outcomes are critically important so that future trials in this field can use and report these outcomes. So this is hot off the press. I've not shared this before. The second round of the survey has only just closed, and these are some of the outcomes that definitely will be in this core outcome set. We see here areas related to survival, so disease-free survival, overall survival as well. The area of post-operative complications, this is what patients, nurses and surgeons are telling us is critically important and that we must report in every single surgical trial. And that includes things like all-cause complications, so an overall reporting of how the rate of complications in general. These are split into intraoperative complications, related to anesthetics and anesthesia, but also things more specific such as death following surgery, anastomotic complications. So that means the complications down to the joins, the surgical joins that we make for the patients. Other severe complications such as multiple organ failure and bleeding during the operation. There are also other aspects of the treatment pathway or gastrectomy that you may not think were important. Certainly from a healthcare professional, we know that nutritional effects, so the longer term problems, are not traditionally reported in trials, as is quality of life. But here we have surgeons, nurses, and especially patients telling us that in fact we must, under all circumstances, we must make sure that nutritional effects and overall quality of life are included as well. So the next steps. So this is the what. So we have discovered what outcomes should be reported. There's a little bit of work just to complete that list because there's going to be a consensus meeting to ratify exactly what the results have shown from the international survey, and that will happen next March in Manchester. And there will be a virtual portion of that, so patients and healthcare professionals will be able to join that consensus meeting virtually in the same way that I'm joining you today. And then there'll be some extra work to do in the future with some of the other groups, looking at when we should be reporting outcomes, i.e., for example, survival, should it be 5 years, at 3 years, at 2 years, at 1 year, and how we report outcomes. So, for example, if we look at complications, should we also be looking at the severity of these complications as well? So it's always important from my perspective that we try and tie research studies back to the real world benefits. How will patients actually benefit from something like this core outcome set? Well, the first thing that we will see is that trial designs will improve because the trials will now be more relevant to the key stakeholders, the patients and the healthcare professionals, because the outcomes, the results that we will be reporting will be the same and will be critically important. no longer will we hopefully see trials which are reporting things which are irrelevant, or reporting or not reporting, or missing out the reporting of outcomes which are vitally important to patients as well. We also look at registries and audits, and these suffer the same problems that we see in surgical trials as well. I know that there's plans for a large registry in Canada looking to collect the outcomes from gastric cancer surgery. And it's important for them to inform them what are the priorities, what's important for us to record. And then finally, and I think this is probably the thing that's most important in the immediacy, is that understanding what is important to patients helps shape the discussion that surgeons and healthcare professionals can have with patients, particularly during the consent process when talking to them about surgery. We've heard already from audience members this morning that things such as dumping syndrome, quality of life, what life is like, how they eat, etc., etc. And much of this is completely glossed over by healthcare professionals because they don't know what is important to discuss with patients. And certainly when patients are having that discussion with their surgeons at the time, they're going through the trauma of a new diagnosis. They often don't know what to expect. They don't know what questions to ask. And it's only often after the fact that many patients tell us, I wish I would have asked that had I known what I know now. So as is custom, this kind of study, this research is not something which is standalone. This is not something that I've done on my own, but has involved a huge amount of collaboration from healthcare professionals, from nursing groups, from surgical groups, and especially from patient groups, particularly My Gut Feeling and gastric cancer support groups all across the world, both in North America, Europe, in China, in the Far East, in South America, Central Europe, and in Africa as well. These are just some of the working group that have been involved in the design and the delivery of this study. And certainly where I first met Teresa and Katie was at the International Gastric Cancer Congress in Prague earlier this year, where we had the opportunity to have a group photograph with some of our collaborators. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have.
So thank you, Bilal, for leading this incredible research that's so important to patients, and also congratulations on becoming a new dad. That's amazing. And I'm especially thrilled because I hate technology, so I'm so thrilled, and thanks to EventStream and Bilal, to be able to do this and having someone speak to us from the UK. So we're really thrilled. So any questions for Bilal?
Could we move the camera towards the audience so that I can see them?
Okay. So my question, I have two questions. One is around, the data you presented, and there was a list hot off the press. Is that ranked by priority, or is that just the key areas?
Okay. And then, was there another section, another question?
And then the second question is, how much of the study is centered around time to diagnose, or, the first part of it, how quickly you get to a diagnosis?
Okay. Thank you. Right. So in terms of the outcomes, they are absolutely not ranked. So there would be a way for us to determine the strength of feeling amongst the participants within the survey. But certainly from our perspective, what is important for us was to identify all outcomes which were felt to be critically important. So we haven't differentiated. We haven't, for example, ask patients which is their number one outcome. We haven't done that. What we've asked, and we've had some pretty strict criteria in order to define what is a critically important outcome. and there was a high bar to pass in order for it to be included in that list. So really, if it's in the list is highly important. It's very, very important. So with respect to your second question, time to diagnosis, this study looks at outcomes following surgery. It doesn't address any issues before surgery. It doesn't look at the issues or the problems before surgery. It simply looks at what is important to measure and report after surgery so that we can answer that question, which is the best surgical approach for patients. I can't hear.
I have a question. I know these medical trials and so on, they have rules and regulations.
Correct.
I'm wondering if it would be possible for participants in a trial to share their experience online, social media, or a forum of some kind on the internet, and if this would be a useful thing.
I would say that I'd always say that sharing experiences is vitally important. Certainly, what we found is that patients sharing their experiences, certainly with us, has been vitally important. What we've found is we've begun to understand the patient perspective much better as a result of patients telling us what is important. Now, certainly on a day-to-day basis, we have a very active support group in our region where patients not only tell us what's important and can communicate with us, but communicate with other patients as well. And we find that patients going through the initial stages of treatment, going through the longer-term follow-up of treatment, find this immensely valuable. Now, we have other areas within our field. So I also do bariatric surgery and weight loss surgery. And we know that online forums are highly active and are heavily relied on by patients. And there's no reason why gastric cancer surgical forums should be any different. So I would certainly support that. And I would perhaps ask Teresa and Katie whether they would be interested in starting something like that up.
So we have a question from online, and they're asking, where is the research funding coming from, and does the use of chemo and radiation fall into your research, or is it just surgical research?
That's an excellent question. So when we first, certainly our funding was from the National Institute of Health Research. That is the largest grant awarding body in the United Kingdom. We were given approximately $500,000 in order to undertake this research over the last few years. It was important that we got this recognition from a large grant awarding body, and it certainly helped our cause and helped us promote this trial. With regards to the second question about whether this is just surgery or also involves chemoradiotherapy, we had a long, hard think about whether or not we should be doing a core outcome set for trials involving chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And what we felt was that there was enough activity within the surgical research field for us to warrant developing a core outcome set for surgical trials alone. Now, what we want to do in the future is then move on and incorporate or develop a future core outcome set looking at multimodal therapy, such as that which includes chemotherapy and radiotherapy. So that is definitely in the pipeline. Will take a lot more work than what we've already put into this core outcome set, but it's something which we are planning on.
Thank you for this very excellent presentation and the work that you're doing. If I understood correctly, you're going for some important benefits with this study to, I think you listed 3 key benefits, is that right? to do with, and I'm wondering what can be done to optimize the adoption of this process that you're talking about for future studies. It's great that you're doing this study, but do people really have to listen to this and follow the recommendations, and how can you gain better buy-in?
Correct. So the issue of buy-in is vitally important. It underpins this study. If researchers and grant awarding bodies do not recognize this work, then it will fall flat on its face and it will not be able to achieve its stated aims. So from the outset, it was important that we have buy-in from the important grant awarding bodies, active researchers, and in particular, people who, or the countries where surgical trials are particularly active. And we have that. From the outset, we have a large working group, and I showed a picture of some of those individuals who are involved in this research, who are active within the research field of gastric cancer. This is very much a collaborative effort, and as a consequence, we are already seeing support from the International Gastric Cancer Association. Many of the gastric cancer associations of other countries such as Korea, Japan, South America, across Europe, the Canadian Gastric Cancer Association as well has helped certainly with recruitment to this study. So there's no reason why this work would not be adopted. The other issue comes back to the validity of the results. Researchers will only use it if they feel that the results are valid and applicable to their patient populations. And that's why we wanted to make this an international study, something that involved patients from all across the globe. And we will certainly be doing some further analysis to demonstrate that this core outcome set is valid and applicable across the globe.
Thank you so much, Bilal, for joining us all the way from the United Kingdom.
Thank you.
We would now like to invite all our patient survivors and caregiver and healthcare providers up to the stage for our panel discussion. So at this point, if we can invite Denise, Ala, Bilal, if you could stay on, Terrence,
Absolutely.
George, and then we would also like to invite Melissa Aronson, who is a senior genetics counselor at the Zane Cohen Center. If you could all join us at the front, please. Thank you. So the first thing we'd like to do is thank you so much for bringing us through the first portion of our conference. We'd like to open it up to questions, and I know there was a lot of questions that weren't answered.
Hi, Dr. Bilal. This is very loud. My question is, my daughter was diagnosed here in October, so she got 8 chemos, Fofox, that was working very well. And then February 17, she want to, actually I think her husband want to go home to London, UK. So they left in February, and she got more 4 chemos at the Guy's Hospital in London. So after that 4 chemos, they did a new scan. I think scan is the name. And then they saw that was not working anymore. But in the meantime, in end of March, she still was strong, even only getting juice since October. She could not swallow, not even water almost. So they never offered a trial or said, when we asked about immunotherapy, at the Guy's Hospital. They said in UK is not allowed immunotherapy. So then she started with ascites in beginning of April, and she had lots of pain. So she called into a doctor, and that was on the phone. Something that I hated, and I think it's so wrong. So the doctors told us, oh, it must be gas in the intestinal that, or you are blowing, or it's constipation. So a week after, she called in again. So the other doctor says the same thing. So that holds 3 weeks in April. So she formed 15 liters of fluid without knowing that was ascites. So then at the end of April, she went to the emergency in a London hospital. So they took her in for 5 days without doing any drain or, oh, it's a bit of fluid, they said, but that's not so much. Other day, another person came in and said, oh, it's quite a bit, so you need to go home. So home, yes, you need to go to the Guy's Hospital where you get chemos. So 5 days, that poor girl, she was taking like every hour morphines and every painkillers that could be. So is this normal for the UK to treat patients like this? That I found not human. I, as a mother, not only that I lost my only child and my best friend, but I never will understand and go over this. And the other question I have is that in July she had symptoms, and the family doctor sent her to the barium swallow test. It came fine back, nothing to see. And then October, she was diagnosed with cancer stage 4. Where was the cancer in July? Was it no stage, or was it already like 2 or 3, or what do you think? And my last question is, here they call it esophageal cancer, and in London on the papers I could see they call it like gastric cancer. And I think one time I hear that was on the junction, the tumor, the primary tumor, and it was going to the liver and the lymph nodes. But was there nothing else really to do to prolong her life or to save her life in your eyes? And thank you very much to make time for us.
Right, thank you. Well, firstly, I'm sorry for your loss, and you know, it's obviously a highly emotional and very difficult story for you to tell. So thank you for telling us and being brave enough to be able to talk to us about it. There are a couple of issues here. So I'm going to try and keep the answer as short as I can. Firstly, it's always difficult for me to go into lots of details without fully understanding the small details of the story and the diagnosis. I think we can all find times where patients who have come to us have been extremely disappointed by the quality and the standard of care that they have received. And I think that's not just relevant to gastric cancer, stomach cancer, but it can be relevant to all kinds of cancer diagnoses. And it's something that a lot of doctors still struggle with. You know, whether we like it or not, cancer is a specialist area. We have specialized the delivery and the management of cancer, and as a consequence, what you will find is that a lot of people are not comfortable dealing with diagnoses, breaking bad news, and communicating as they should communicate. So I don't think this is something which is specific to the United Kingdom, but it can be applied anywhere across the globe. With respect to barium swallow, we heard from the first speaker already, the barium swallow is not the first port of call for a suspected diagnosis of esophageal or gastric cancer, and in fact it should be a gastroscopy. what we find with younger patients is that many of the symptoms that they present with to the doctors, to their physicians, primary care physicians, are often completely ignored and minimized as this is just gastroesophageal reflux, this is just stress, psychology, something else entirely unrelated. It can't possibly be stomach cancer because you're far too young. And the bottom line is that we are seeing far greater numbers of younger patients who are developing gastric cancer than we have ever seen before. We don't know why, but certainly as a specialist in this area, I can tell you that is the trend. And we are doing a lot of work to try and educate primary care physicians in our region to help them lower that threshold for requesting gastroscopy. With respect to the final point, which was, could they have done anything else? One of my slides right at the beginning was that survival has not improved at all over the last 4 decades. And it sounds like with the liver metastases and lymph node metastases, and unfortunately, at the time of diagnosis, the reality is there's not as many options in terms of treatment available for most patients with stage 4 stomach cancer as there would be with somebody with stage 1, 2, or 3. However, we've heard again from the first speaker, it was an excellent talk, about some of the alternative treatments, but these alternative treatments they can only be delivered if we have things like biomarkers, subtyping of gastric cancer, and again, that is not available freely. It is only available in a certain places. You may have to pay for it out of your own pocket, but until we start subtyping stomach cancers, understanding which is the best treatment for those subtypes of stomach cancer, we will not make an improvement in survival from gastric cancer.
Thank you, Bilal. And I think Carmen brought up a lot of really excellent points. I think she touched a little bit about the frustrations of caregivers and patients about not having access to novel therapies, which I think Terrence spoke a little bit about. She spoke a little bit about the frustrations of being diagnosed late and being a young patient. She touched a little bit about diet. So I just wanted to open the floor to our other panelists to see if there's anything else that you guys would like to add in terms of what Carmen mentioned.
I guess, so I just want to reinforce the point that the symptoms are very non-specific early on, and we just need to do, we need to do more scopes. That's the bottom line. We need to catch the symptoms much earlier on so that we diagnose more patients at stage 1, stage 2, instead of stage 3, stage 4. That's really our best chance of lowering gastric cancer mortality rates.
I'll just also add that in order to find the marker to see who would be the best person to benefit from immunotherapy, you have to test the tumor for certain markers called mismatch repair proteins. And this isn't being done routinely, not in Ontario, not for gastric cancers. So we do it for all colon cancers, all endometrial cancers, but normally for people with gastric or GE junction, it's only done in genetics. And it would be a great thing if we could push to have the gastric cancers all undergo this mismatch repair protein test at diagnosis to see who may be someone who would benefit from immunotherapy. So along with pushing for immunotherapy, also for doing that test to identify them.
We have another question.
My name is Shadab Ahmed. Back in 2008, I lost my grandfather to a stomach cancer. And this year, in the February, I realized my dad too has a stomach cancer, and he's currently, we identified when he was in the stage 4, and currently he's going through treatment in India, and he has already gone through 18 chemotherapies. So when I came to know about in February, I took compassionate care leave, and I was for 6 months, I was in India next to my dad. when my leave got over, I came back again, and whatever I can do from here, I'm doing my best. Out of curiosity, I've had a feeling that it could be genetic. First, it happened to my grandfather, then my father, and I could be the next in line. So I go to my, sorry? I'm in the process of that. So that's what I'm coming to. So I just go to my family physician and I say, okay, this is my situation. So he asked me to get the H. pylori test done. So I go and do, and they found that in me. And then they gave me for the 2 weeks of antibiotic, which I just completed around a month back. I said, okay, so how do I know next that this antibiotic is totally gone and like it should be fine? Then they asked me to go through some breathing tests, but again, it's to be done after 2 months, and I would be completing my 2 months in this year of December last week, and then I would be going for that test. And then he was not very supportive of me going to the professional, like the gastrology or oncology, but I still convinced him that, okay, you need to prescribe me to visit any of these. So again, my appointment is next week in December. Next week, the first week of December, with a gastrologist. So I'm still trying, I'm not saying that I'm there anymore. I'm just trying to control in my diet or lifestyle or whatever I could do best for myself. My question is that when my father went through this, we spoke about research, everything, but I guess none of us still have touched about how financially it could be draining too, right? So since in India we don't have a healthcare supportive, so in last 6 months we have already spent in terms of Canadian dollars 70 to 80,000. Oh, sorry. So in India, so we don't have a government healthcare, so it's all on your own. Whatever you can afford, you go towards that kind of healthcare or hospital, depending on what you can afford. So far, we have spent like $70,000, $80,000 in India. I want to know, for those of you guys who got treated here locally, how supportive our OHIP or the employment benefits or the insurance service provider here in Canada is of this. Like George, you got treated here, right? Terence, you got treated here. How supportive is our OHIP or the government system in terms of benefits, insurance? How far we are there? How inclusive they are?
Well, I guess I can speak to our system here in Ontario with OHIP. So this is a publicly funded system, meaning that you don't pay for your surgeries, you don't pay for like your nursing care while in the hospital. You don't really pay for your hospital care. Medications, so chemotherapy is covered. Medications that support the side effects of chemotherapies are covered for some people. So if you're over the age of 65 or you're under the age of 25, we have public programs for that. In between that bracket, you usually rely on private insurance through your work or your own private insurance. But the main treatment, chemotherapy, is covered. Things like immunotherapy. So for example, pembrolizumab, which is not approved by Health Canada, is not funded by any of the provinces. That would cost about $10,000 a month on average. And that's something that we need funding for. That's something that no single individual can pay for. So we need the money to get those medications approved. So that's the system here in Ontario.
In my case, I had the Whipple surgery back in 2011. I think it was the McGuinty government, and they sent a nurse to my home. It was great. She took really good care of me. But for the surgeries after that, the Wynne government, there was no home service whatsoever, or the current Ford. They're just, surprisingly, since his own brother passed away of a similar thing, he just doesn't seem interested in developing this.
So I think that brings up a good point in terms of access to care. I think we're all very fortunate to be in Toronto, to have geneticists, nutritionists, dietitians, all these services and all this access to clinical trials. I guess the question would be is how do people outside of the Toronto very fortunate catchment area get access to your services and your specializations?
I can only speak about genetics and genetic testing, which is free in Ontario to people who are eligible. So if you have a family history, you would have to be referred to a genetic clinic. They would assess to see if you're eligible for testing, and if you are, it's covered anywhere in Ontario. So if you don't live in Toronto, you would go to hopefully a local genetic clinic wherever is near you. There are certainly lots of clinics in the States. It's not the same healthcare system, so you'd have to look into your insurance coverage, and I can't speak for the UK or other countries.
Hello? Oh, there we go. So in terms of dietitians, if you go on the Dietitians of Canada website and you click on Find Dietitian, there are lists of dietitians that, depending on where you live, you can access. Some are private, meaning that you would have to pay out of pocket. There are also access to dietitians through family health care teams, where that is covered by OHIP and you wouldn't have to pay out of pocket. So yeah, in terms of nutritionists or dietitians, there is access to us, yep.
Here,
We have a few more questions.
my question is to all of you in the panel as well as a doctor from the United Kingdom. I just wonder, I understand that when patients are diagnosed at stage 1 and stage 2, the survival rate will be greater. But can any work be done or attention or focus on not even having any person getting gastric cancer? So, which means do all the work to keep us healthy and happy. In that case, then it might benefit to the whole wide world. I don't know whether this is an appropriate question. If not, get me out of this auditorium. Thank you.
I guess I'll try to answer this question. We don't know of a way to prevent stomach cancer altogether, except for the subgroup of patients that have hereditary conditions, where I guess you call that even stage 0, where they go for routine screening, they do biopsies, they find out that there might be some cells that might be cancerous, and they go for a stomach resection, what we call prophylactically, as a prevention. So perhaps in that group, that's the closest that we have come to preventing stomach cancer in the first place. So I think there's the CDH1 mutations and the Lynch syndrome and a bunch of hereditary populations where screening is done routinely and they take out the stomach prophylactically, and so that might be the best chance. And so for everyone else, I'm a strong advocate of implementing a universal screening program where we go for scopes on a routine basis, even in the absence of symptoms, and that might be something close to preventing stomach cancer.
I'll just say that there are different kinds of stomach cancer. The pathology of stomach cancer is different. So the kind that Terence was talking about is diffuse type stomach cancer. Even through endoscopy, we often can't see it because it grows under the lining of the stomach. And so even with endoscopy, you often can't detect diffuse gastric cancer. Sometimes you luckily randomly biopsy a spot that has it, but often not. And so for those subset of patients who have this hereditary condition, they may choose to have their stomachs removed precancerous. And when we look at their stomachs, they often already have cancer in their stomachs that was not detected through endoscopy. That's very different than the majority of stomach cancers, which are not the diffuse type, which may be linked to H. pylori and may be more effective to screen. So it depends a little also on the type of cancer that people have.
The World Cancer...
Can I make an additional point to that? We've already heard that, so the genetic, the familial type cancers that we can potentially do, prophylactic gastrectomy for, they represent a very, very small proportion of the overall cancers. The other thing to bear in mind is the incidence of stomach cancer has reduced over the decades. So we are seeing more esophageal cancer, certainly in the Western world, than we are seeing gastric cancer. And I treat both. So I have the benefit of seeing the incidence of one reducing whilst the other one increases, certainly from in the Western world where we're talking about adenocarcinoma. With respect to screening, there is a lot of work going on in the UK trying to identify an appropriate screening method which is acceptable to patients to reduce the risk of diagnosing cancer late on. So the Rebecca Fitzgerald lab in Cambridge is developing something called the Cyto sponge, where you swallow a small pill which is attached to a long thread. So you do that in the outpatient's clinic in your doctor's surgery. The capsule of the pill dissolves within 2 to 3 minutes, and then a sponge pops out at the end of the string, and then the sponge is pulled out. And what we're trying to do is take brushings of the lining of the stomach and of the lining of the esophagus to try and detect dysplasia, abnormal cells, or malignancy. There's other work as well looking at something called volatile organic compounds, which is using a breath test. There are certain compounds which are emitted from stomach and esophageal cancer in particular, and these can be identified through specific breathing apparatus, scientific equipment, which may increase the chance of us identifying cancer early on. These are things which are happening, which are certainly being investigated in research right now as we speak. We look forward to see the results of those, but it is down to early screening. We've seen it in Japan, we've seen it in Korea. That is the way in which we're going to improve survival in the long term. We're never going to be able to completely eradicate gastric cancer. Cancer is prevalent, it does occur. We would like to reduce the risk. We've eradicated H. pylori in a lot of people. Maybe PPI therapy has helped reduce the incidence of gastric cancer overall, perhaps, we don't know. But screening is definitely the way forward.
So we'll take a couple of more questions, and then all I wanted to say was if you have more questions, we do have other panel discussions throughout the day, and also you could always send your questions. We will make sure that they get answered, so you could just send your questions to info@mygutfeeling.ca, and those questions that are online that haven't been answered, we'll make sure that they get answered either throughout the day or as soon as possible post the conference, because we want to make sure that people get the information that they've joined to get. So we'll take a few more questions.
Is about screening as well, and my daughter's 36, and because I don't have the gene, her doctor is not allowing her to have endoscopies yet. And I think 36, I think she should have started the screening when I was diagnosed 4 years ago. So how do you overcome a doctor suggesting that you don't do endoscopies for screening?
I say find another doctor. But.
Yeah,
but that's my perspective.
I was just going to say that my daughter was also diagnosed with Lynch syndrome, and she was 32. So if you push, you have to have, screening is so important, and finding out about everything you can about it. And sometimes we have to educate the doctors. Sometimes the doctors are so overwhelmed that they miss little bits. So you have to push your agenda, because let's face it, we're pretty resilient, but we do need a helping hand here.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to give away my presentation because I'm the last presentation of the day, but you really all got to stay around and hear my story. I'm from the United States, from New Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl. Number one, You have to be genetically tested. H. pylori is wonderful, but you have it in your family. You go to a geneticist and you say, I want to be genetically tested. I don't care if it costs you money. You have it done. Because what's happening is, with the CDH1 gene, it's the stomach cancer gene, they are finding subsets upon subsets upon subsets every day that they can't directly correlate to the actual stomach cancer, but eventually it's going to turn out that you have a subset somewhere, or you might even have the CDH1 gene, that's causing, when it's in the family like that from generation to generation, there's something going on. And even if they can't find it now, you want it on record so that in the future, when it catches up to you, you'll be treated. H. pylori is wonderful, but that's not the whole thing of it, okay? Second, I love you, the doctor on the end, and I'm gonna tell you why. I was just at a symposium at the Cleveland Clinic in Florida, and we had a doctor there from Japan that spoke. And let me tell you what they do in Japan, and the doctor that's on the monitor will also agree with me. Early detection, okay, unheard of here or in the United States. In Japan and Korea, the van parks outside the company for lunch. They go out there before they eat, they get an endoscopy, they come back in and they go to work. That's how they do it in the countries that have a higher rate of incidence of gastric cancer than we do. And the reason why we can't have that done in the United States is because endoscopies are considered an invasive procedure, so they don't want you to keep on going under. But in Japan and Korea, where it's more prevalent, they think nothing of doing it that way. And I'm sorry, in hindsight, I'd rather go under anesthesia or local or whatever a couple times a year and know that I don't have stomach cancer than have to worry about it coming and me having stage 4 stomach cancer 10 years ago. So I love the idea that you're pushing the endoscopy. The first thing I tell people when I talk to them is, number 1, have you had an endoscopy? Because that's the only way. And number 2, have you been genetically tested?
So it's just a few comments here. So I guess, the question as to, you go to your family doctor, you want a scope, they say no. So I work in a front line, so perhaps I can come to their defense. So this is the scenario. You tell, if you're completely asymptomatic, you go to your family doctor, and let's say you come see me in my office, and you say, I want to get screened, and you have none of the traditional risk factors. So I look it up, okay, should this patient, 36-year-old with 0 risk factors, should I send him for a scope? And the answer that I look at would be no, but you convinced me well enough, I'm gonna refer you to a gastroenterologist, just on the off chance that they'll accept it. I do a referral to a gastroenterologist, and I say, this patient has 0 risk factors, has no symptoms whatsoever, she's extremely young, can you scope her to make her feel better? So the gastroenterologist receives the referral and will be like, well, you know what? This is one patient that's extremely low risk, and there are 1,000 patients who have, I guess, more legit reason to have a scope. So maybe this one we won't do. And so this is sort of what actually happens in real life. And the way to go around that is, number 1, if you have any kind of symptoms, then you give your family doctor more ammunition to then tell the gastroenterologist to go for a scope. So that's number 1. Number 2, we have to work at the legislative, at the legislative and guideline level, sort of a top-down approach. Look at colon cancer, for example. We advocate for screening with colonoscopies starting at the age 50, either with colonoscopies or fecal occult blood tests or whatnot. Patients don't have symptoms and they go for screening. So that's at the top-down level. We have to push our governments, we have to change policies, we have to change guidelines so that this can be implemented at the public health level. Because doctors are powerless. I would be powerless if you came to me with that exact situation. I can't guarantee I can get you a scope, despite the fact that I am a stomach cancer patient. I can't guarantee that I will get you the scope. Even if I was a gastroenterologist, I may not guarantee that I can use the resources of the hospital to get you a scope. And so this has to be at the top-down level. We have to change our government policies. We have to change our legislature. We have to change the guidelines. And so that's something that we have to work on as a group.
So okay, this will be the last question because we need to go to break and.
Oh, okay. In response to the lady there who mentioned about prevention, because you're all, in my opinion, missing the mark. You're talking about diagnoses and getting things done early and having laws and so on so that there's a universal test. I would say that, and I think most people would agree, that 99% of all illness is due to poor nutrition. And now, and I think it's also accepted that we are not getting it from our food. The quality of food has been so degraded, the soil, plants are no longer, we're not getting the nutrients that we need from the food that we consume. Therefore, I would propose vitamin therapy, and vitamin therapy may not work for a lot of these people whose, maybe through genetics or whatever it is, they're not able to absorb nutrients. Even if the food contained proper nutrients, their system cannot absorb it. Right? So for these people, they would have to get vitamins in the form of IV, directly in the bloodstream. For the rest of us who have perfectly working digestive tracts, but we're not getting our nutrients from the food, I guess just swallowing vitamins and taking a vitamin therapy from, I would say, from birth is now necessary and will prevent the onset of a lot of disease. I think why we're seeing an increase in diseases across the board is because of the poor quality of food.
So I'll ask the dietitians to speak to that.
So we know that 33% of all cancers may be related to diet and lifestyle, so that still means that 67% of cancers may not be related to diet, and certainly there's a genetic component to a lot of cancers. There could be a diet and genetic interaction for a lot of cancers, particularly stomach cancer. The World Cancer Research Fund is an organization encompassing a bunch of scientists who are consistently reviewing the high-quality scientific evidence looking at diet and lifestyle and impact on cancer. In reference to stomach cancer, they do have these documents called continuous update projects in which you can look at the best evidence linking diet to risk of stomach cancer. And certainly we are seeing a rise in stomach cancers associated with the esophagus, the esophageal junction, as opposed to decreased rates in other areas of the stomach. And that could be related to diet and lifestyle, such as alcohol intake, obesity. But the recommendation from the World Cancer Research Fund is to actually get nutrition through food rather than supplements in terms of cancer prevention.
So thank you, panelists. Thank you, Bilal. Go spend time with your baby and your wife. So we will take a 15-minute break, and we have to stick to the 15-minute break because we're running late. So there's some snacks outside, and you can continue talking and asking questions there, and then we'll come back in.